My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Jesus, whenever we do a time of prayer, we always propose to place ourselves in your presence and deal with you, interact with you in your sacred humanity. We want to talk with you, listen to you, and react to your life, to your words, to your gestures. And this is what we do in every 10 minutes with Jesus. We place ourselves in a scene of the gospel, and we become one more person in that scene, seeking to get to know you, Jesus, so as to love you more. And today we place ourselves in a scene from your life as a preacher. And we can imagine that scene where people were coming from all over Israel to listen to your teaching. When Jesus saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. By now it was already late, and his disciples approached him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it is already very late. Dismiss them so that they can go to the surrounding farms and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Jesus said to them in reply, "Give them some food yourselves." Well, first off, we can meditate on the fact that in this scene, everything is on a huge scale. Even the setting for the story is immense. We know that our Lord has crossed the Sea of Galilee, and at the far side of this lake, there's a wide space where a huge crowd can gather. And how big is this crowd? Well, it's not clear. We know by the end of the gospel that there were 5,000 men. But perhaps there were also women and children. We could add another third, for example, to include those women and children, maybe 7,000 people, 8,000 people. It's a lot. Perhaps it was the biggest crowd that the apostles had ever seen, or you, Jesus, for that matter. Perhaps this was the largest gathering of followers yet. And while the disciples begin to panic before the situation of this lack of food, you, Lord, are serene. Perhaps they think, the disciples, that there will be a revolt or an uprising among the people due to this lack of food. You, Jesus, certainly are concerned that they might faint along the way if they are sent to the villages. And so the situation is intense, it's immense in every respect, because there's a lot of people and it's not clear how they're going to eat. And the apostles rightfully feel very small. They don't see how they could possibly provide. And Jesus, you challenge them. You say, "Give them some food yourselves." The apostles respond, "Are we to buy 200 days' wages worth of food and give it to them to eat?" He asks them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." Jesus, it's like you're pushing them to do some research, to figure this out, to really think this through, even maybe think outside the box a little bit. What do you have? And when they had found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. So he gave orders to have them sit down in groups on the green grass. The people took their places in rows by hundreds and by 50s. Jesus, you push the apostles to really pursue a solution, and you involve them. You get them involved. Now, again, there's this immensity of everything that's happening, the amount of people, the situation that becomes more and more intense. And it's contrasted with this poverty of resources. All they have are 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed thousands of people. There's 2 interesting little details here. We know from the Gospel of John that the loaves were made of barley, 5 barley loaves. This was the cheapest kind of bread on the market. In fact, barley was really considered animal feed, and so it was only the very poor who would eat barley loaves. And then the fact that you, Lord, invite them all to sit on the ground. Sitting on the ground is also, we could say, a symbol of poverty and even powerlessness. There weren't even any rocks or stumps for them to sit on, nothing to support their bodies. They had to simply sit on the ground. The poverty of the situation, barley loaves. Why this sharp contrast? Jesus, it's almost like you want the apostles to see and realize for themselves the poverty of their resources before the magnitude of the world's needs, before the immensity of the people clamoring for food. St. Josemaria had an experience like this when he visited London in the summer of 1958. He made a quick tour of the city, and when he got to that part of London which is called the City, kind of the business center of that great metropolis, London, the streets were crowded with people, office workers, men in business suits, people walking rapidly from one place to another. The traffic was dense with red omnibuses and black taxis, all pressing ahead at a feverish pace. Almost every building displayed plaques with foundational dates, established in 1748, established in 1760, or in 1825. And St. Josemaria's mind took in the full historical meaning of all this and its consequences. That this was a very old and historic, rich economic power, a very worldly power that seemed almost impenetrable. The city seemed like some mighty, centuries-old tree, and mingling in the multitude of people, each intent on their own affairs, were all sorts of exotic faces and dress, Indian, African, Chinese, Arabic. And he felt overwhelmed. Facing up to our Lord in the silence of his prayer, he reviewed all possible resources and arrived at the solitary conclusion that to take all this to Christ, all these souls, all these businesses, all these worldly affairs, demanded a supernatural lever and supernatural strength. And so he experienced a locution from God. The date was August 10th, 1958. As he looked around him, it's like he almost felt like he was going to faint, seeing all these skyscrapers, these great financial institutions, their buildings depicting their wealth, their worldwide influence. Later he would say, I somewhat lost my composure. I felt useless and powerless. I said to myself, Josemaria, you can't do anything here. Without God, I could not even pull a blade of grass from the ground. My whole miserable weakness was so apparent that I almost grew sad, and that's bad. Why should a son of God be sad? He can be weary, like a faithful donkey pulling a cart, but sad, never. Suddenly, in the middle of the street, where people from all corners of the world were crossing paths, I felt within me, in the depth of my heart, the motion of God's power. I felt him reassuring me, you can do nothing, but I can do everything. You are weakness, but I am strength. I shall be with you, and that will have an effect. We shall lead souls to happiness, to unity, to the way of salvation. In the city of London, we shall sow peace and happiness in abundance. Jesus, it's as if you wanted St. Josemaria to experience firsthand the power and immensity of the world's institutions, of a secular culture that is far from God, so as to be more fully aware of his own poverty. And this is what happens by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus asks them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus, you want the apostles to participate in your act of feeding the crowds, of cooperating with him. It's like you need their bread, you need their resources, or at least you want them to help you. But at the same time, you also want them to see their own poverty, that their gifts, their contributions are so small. In fact, in another gospel, this scene includes the line from Andrew, "What is this for so many people?" Do we have this same conviction of our own limitations? Do we have this same conviction of our own poverty, but in such a way that opens us up to God's power so that we can repeat, like St. Josemaria, "I cannot do this, but you can, Jesus. I cannot feed them, Lord, on my own, but with your help, I can." This is what the apostles learn, and this is what we want to learn, to recognize our own poverty and then turn to God to recognize his strength and lean on his strength. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you've communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.